It was Maya who convinced me to hike the Superstition Mountains in July that I should have known better. The Arizona sun in midsummer isn't just hot, it's a physical weight, a presence that presses down on you, wringing every drop of moisture from your skin before you even have a chance to sweat. But Maya had this way of tilting her head, a little smile playing on her glossy lips and saying, "Come on, Mark. Live a little." And I'd followed. I always followed. We started at the Peralta trailhead east of Apache Junction, just as the sky was shifting from deep indigo to a pale, bleached-out blue. The air was still cool, smelling of dust and creosote. Maya was wearing a tight, gray tank top and hiking shorts that showed off her long, tan legs that I remember watching the way the muscles in her calves flexed with each step, the delicate curve of her ankle above her sturdy boot. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that swung like a metronome, and every so often she'd glance back at me, her brown eyes crinkling at the corners. "You keeping up, old man?" she teased. That I was 32, only 4 years older than her. "Just admiring the view," I said, and my eyes dipped, against my better judgment, to the way her shorts hugged the sway of her hips. There was a faint sheen of sweat already forming at the small of her back, darkening the gray fabric. That I felt a familiar low pull of desire, mixed with a flicker of guilt that we were friends, had been for years, ever since we'd ended up in the same graphic design program at ASU. There was always this current between us. Something unspoken that we'd gotten close a few times after a few too many drinks, but one of us always pulled back. Usually me. That I was bad at crossing lines. The first few miles were easy. The trail was well defined, winding through stands of saguaro and palo verde, the giant cacti standing like silent, armed sentinels. The landscape was stark and beautiful, all red rock and sharp shadows. That we talked about work, about mutual friends, about nothing important. The sun climbed, and the heat began to bake the rocks, the air shimmering above them. That it was around the 2-hour mark that I first felt it. That a prickle on the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched. That I stopped and turned, scanning the trail behind us. That it stretched back, empty and sun-blasted, dipping into a shallow canyon we'd passed through. "What's up?" Maya asked, pausing ahead of me. She took a long swallow from her water bottle, and I watched the line of her throat move. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Just thought I heard something." I hadn't heard anything, that was the thing. The desert was preternaturally silent. No birds, no insects, no rustle of lizards in the brush. Just the whisper of a hot, dry wind and the crunch of our boots on gravel. That we pushed on, aiming for a place called Fremont Saddle, which promised a view of the famous Weaver's Needle. The trail began to climb more steeply, switchbacking up a rocky slope. The silence deepened, becoming a tangible thing. That it was a silence that felt heavy, expectant. That I found my eyes constantly drifting back to our backtrail. That it remained empty. That's when I saw him for the first time. That we were taking a break on a flat outcrop, gulping warm water. Maya had taken off her baseball cap and was fanning her face with it, her cheeks flushed. That a strand of dark hair had escaped her ponytail and was stuck to her damp temple. That I was fighting the urge to reach over and brush it away. I looked down the slope, back the way we'd come, and there he was. A man standing maybe 300 yards down the trail, just where it disappeared around a bend. That he was perfectly still. That he wasn't dressed like a hiker. No backpack, no hat, no obvious water. That he wore dark, heavy-looking pants and a long-sleeved shirt, despite the brutal heat. That he was too far away to make out his face, but I could feel his gaze. That it was like a physical touch, a cold spot in the oven like air. "Maya?" I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She was still fanning herself, her eyes closed. "Look." She followed my gaze, squinting. "Where?" "I don't see anyone." I pointed. "Right there. On the trail, the guy in the dark clothes." She shielded her eyes with her hand, staring for a long moment. "Mark, there's no one there." I looked back. The spot was empty. The trail was bare. A trick of the light, the heat haze playing games with my eyes. That's what I told myself. But the cold feeling on my neck remained. We reached Fremont Saddle around noon. The view was breathtaking, a vast, rugged basin sprawling out below us, dominated by the sheer, volcanic spire of Weaver's Needle. We found a patch of shade under a rock overhang and sat down to eat our sandwiches. The silence up here was even more profound. It felt ancient, and for the first time, slightly menacing. Maya sat cross-legged, her knee brushing against mine. A jolt, warm and entirely inappropriate, went through me. I could smell her sunscreen, a faint coconut scent, mixed with a clean sweat on her skin. Her tank top was damp, clinging to her, and I had to force my eyes away from the shape of her breasts, the smooth skin of her collarbone. My heart was pounding, and it wasn't just from the hike. "It's so quiet," she whispered as if afraid to break the spell. "Yeah," I said, "too quiet." I pulled out my phone to take a picture. No service, which was expected. But the photo I took of the vista looked wrong. The colors were muted, washed out, like an old, faded postcard. And in the bottom corner, just at the edge of the frame, was a dark, blurry smudge. I zoomed in. It looked like a figure. The same figure I'd seen on the trail. I quickly locked the phone and shoved it back in my pocket. "We should probably start heading back soon," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. Maya looked at me, her head tilted. "You okay? You've been jumpy ever since we stopped back there." "I'm fine, just, this place is getting to me. The superstitions, you know? All those stories about lost gold and people disappearing." She smiled, a slow, flirtatious smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't tell me you're scared, Mark." I wanted to tell her about the man, about the photo, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. I didn't want her to think I was weak. So I just shrugged and stood up, brushing the dust from my pants. "Let's just go." The journey back should have been straightforward. It was the same trail. Down from the saddle, back through the canyon, then the final stretch to the trailhead. But within 20 minutes I knew something was wrong. The trail didn't look right. It was narrower, for one thing. The rocks were different, more of a rough, black basalt than the reddish-brown sandstone I remembered. The saguaros were sparser, their shapes more twisted, almost grotesque. "Are you sure this is the way?" Maya asked, her voice laced with the first thread of unease. "It has to be," I said, but my own doubt was a cold stone in my gut. "There's only one main trail." We kept walking. The sun was past its zenith now, but the heat was, if anything, more intense. The silence was absolute. My mouth was dry, and it wasn't just from thirst. I pulled out my phone again. The screen was flickering, a faint static crawling around the edges of the display. No signal. The GPS was spinning, unable to get a lock. "My phone's dead," Maya said, holding up her own device. The screen was black, unresponsive. Ahead, the trail forked. I stopped dead. "There wasn't a fork here before," I said, my voice low. "There must have been. We just didn't notice it." But we would have noticed. The trail we'd come up was a single, clear path. This fork was undeniable, two distinct paths leading in slightly different directions through a field of massive, tumbled boulders. "Which way?" Maya's hand went to my arm, her fingers cool against my sun-warmed skin. Her touch sent another unwanted, distracting thrill through me. I could see the pulse beating rapidly at the base of her throat. I had a sudden vivid image of pressing my lips to that spot, feeling her life thrum against my mouth. The thought was so stark and out of place amidst the growing fear that I felt a wave of shame. I don't know. I tried to think, to picture the map I'd glanced at that morning. Left feels more familiar? It didn't. Nothing felt familiar. We took the left fork. The canyon wall seemed to close in around us, the shadows lengthening and deepening prematurely. The air grew cooler, but it was a damp, unpleasant chill, like a tomb. We walked for another hour, our conversation dying completely, replaced by the sound of our ragged breathing and the relentless crunch of our footsteps. That's when we saw him again. He was closer this time, maybe 100 yards ahead, standing beside a particularly twisted, human-like saguaro, same dark, heavy clothes, same unnerving stillness. This time I could see his face. Or rather, I could see that he had a face, but the features were indistinct, blurred, as if I were looking at him through a pane of warped glass. Maya gasped, her grip on my arm tightening. "Who is that?" "I don't know." We stood frozen, watching him. He didn't move. He just stood there, a dark stain against the bleached-out landscape. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice echoing flatly in the dead air. "Hey, we're lost. Can you help us?" The figure didn't respond. Didn't even seem to register that I had spoken. "Let's just go the other way," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. We turned and started back the way we'd come, moving faster now, a slow jog that was hard to maintain on the rocky path. My heart was hammering against my ribs. After 10 minutes, We reached the fork again. We took the right path this time, almost running. This trail was even worse. It wound through a narrow slot canyon, so tight in places we had to turn sideways to squeeze through. The light was a dim, gray twilight. The rocks here were damp to the touch, and the air smelled of wet stone and something else, something metallic and coppery like old blood. We emerged from the slot canyon into a small circular valley I was certain hadn't been on the map. In the center was a dry, cracked mudflat, and standing on the far side of it was the man. He was closer than ever. 50 yards, maybe less. How did he get ahead of us? Maya's voice was a thin, high whisper of pure panic. I had no answer. My mind was racing, trying to find logic in a situation that had none. We were lost, our electronics were dead, the trails were changing, and this thing was hurting us. We have to get past him, I said, the words tasting like ash. The trailhead has to be that way. Mark, no. But I was already stepping onto the mudflat, pulling her along. The man didn't move as we approached. He just watched us. The blurriness of his face was the most horrifying part. It wasn't that he had no features. It was that they were there, shifting and swimming, never resolving into anything human. It was like looking at a photograph of someone taken while they were moving, a smear of a person. We were 20 feet away when he spoke. His voice was dry, rasping, like stones grinding together. It didn't seem to come from his mouth, but from the air around us. The path behind you is gone. I stopped, yanking Maya to a halt beside me. Her whole body was shaking. I could feel the fine tremors through her hand. What did you say? I managed. He raised an arm, a slow, deliberate movement, and pointed back the way we had come. You cannot go back, only forward. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The slot canyon we had just exited was gone. In its place was a solid, unbroken wall of rock. A choked sob escaped Maya's lips. Who are you? I demanded, my fear turning into a brittle anger. What do you want? The blurred face seemed to shift, and for a terrifying second, I thought I saw a mouth form, a dark O of nothingness. I am a landmark. A waypoint, you are off the trail. We're on a trail. I shouted, gesturing at the ground at our feet. No, the voice rasped. This is not your trail. Your trail is gone. It closed behind you. The finality in those words sent a cold spike of terror deep into my spine. This wasn't just being lost. This was something else entirely. We had stepped out of our world and into another one, a silent, sun-bleached purgatory in the Arizona mountains. How do we get back? Maya pleaded, her voice breaking. The man's arm lowered. He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the frantic pounding of my own heart and Maya's ragged breathing. I was acutely aware of her body pressed against my side, the warmth of her, the scent of her fear-sweat. My eyes dropped to the nape of her neck, where tiny damp curls had escaped her ponytail. The desire to protect her was suddenly, violently, mixed with a raw, primal urge to just take her, to feel her alive and solid against me in this place where nothing else made sense. The conflict was dizzying. Follow the cairns, the figure said finally. They will lead you to the water. Do not leave the stones, the land here is hungry. And then he was gone. Not like he walked away or vanished in a puff of smoke. It was more like he was never there to begin with. The space where he'd been standing was just empty air, baking in the sun. We stood there for a full minute, just staring at the empty spot. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Mark? Maya's voice was small, a child's voice. I forced myself to look around, to think. Cairns, rock piles, look for piles of rocks. We scanned the barren valley. At first, I saw nothing. Then, on the far side, near where the man had been standing, I saw a small, deliberate stack of 3 stones. Beyond it, maybe 30 yards away, was another. A path of sorts. There, I said, pointing. We crossed the mud flat, our steps hesitant. The first cairn was just 3 rough, gray stones stacked one on top of the other. It looked ancient. We passed it and headed for the next one. And the next. They led us out of the valley and up another steep, rocky slope. The landscape was utterly alien now. The plants were strange, spiny things I didn't recognize. The rock formations were twisted into nightmarish shapes. The sun, which should have been beginning its descent, seemed frozen in the same spot in the sky, a white, merciless eye. We walked for what felt like hours, our world reduced to the next pile of stones that we didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The horror was too complete, too existential that we were trespassers in a place that did not want us. My mind began to play tricks on me. I'd see movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of dark cloth. I'd hear what sounded like a footstep, but when I turned, there was only the endless silent rock. I was hyper-aware of Maya beside me. The way her hip brushed mine with every other step, the way her shorts had ridden up, exposing more of the smooth tan skin of her thighs. I found myself fixating on the delicate strap of her sports bra, visible through the damp fabric of her tank top. In the midst of this waking nightmare, my body was still responding to hers with a stubborn animal insistence. It felt wrong, profane, but I couldn't stop it. The fear and the desire were two snakes coiled together in my gut. The cairns led us down into another canyon, this one deeper and darker than the others. The air grew cold and damp, and then we heard it, the faint but unmistakable sound of trickling water. Water? Maya breathed, a spark of hope in her exhausted eyes. We hurried forward, following the sound around a bend, and there it was. A tiny spring, welling up from a crack in the rock and forming a small, clear pool before disappearing back into the ground. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. We fell to our knees at the edge of the pool, scooping the cold, clean water into our mouths with our hands. It was the best water I had ever tasted. For a few minutes we just drank and rested, the immediate, physical need overriding the deeper terror. It was Maya who saw it first. "Mark," she said, her voice hollow. "Look." She was pointing at the far side of the pool. Lying on a flat rock, neatly arranged, were two objects. My cell phone. And her cell phone. My blood ran cold. I scrambled around the pool and picked mine up. It was dead, cold and inert. How had they gotten here? We hadn't passed this way. This place wasn't on any map. I looked up from the phones and my eyes fell on the rock face behind them. There were pictures. Dozens of